We are back, and it's been a full 24 hours since I drained out the soaking water for our wheat grains and left it to drain into the sink here and got some air on these grains. Over the past 24 hours, I rinsed them several times to keep them wet. You want to make sure you don't dry them out. It doesn't really, there's no schedule for this. If you live in an extremely dry climate like Arizona or something like that, you may want to set the timer and make sure you rinse them every 2 hours on the dot. But where I live, it's not that dry. It's pretty humid generally most of the year, so I only rinsed them 3 times in the 24-hour period to keep them wet. And as you can see, we've got little sprouts forming here on the wheat kernels. The camera's going to zoom in, and perhaps you can see very prominently showing here. There's a tiny little white sprout coming out of the side of that wheat kernel there. And what you want to do, as soon as you see these little white sprouts appear, you want to stop the sprouting process at that point. You don't want to let the sprouts continue to grow. And the reason for that is the longer the sprouts get, the more the starch of the wheat kernel is actually used up. So if you let the sprouts get too long and then you dry them and grind them into flour, you're not going to have that much flour. So the goal is to, as soon as you see these little white sprouts form, and it takes about 24 hours where I live. It could take up to 48 hours, I'm thinking, in areas where things don't grow quite as quickly, farther north. Then as soon as you see those little sprouts form, then you're going to take these wheat grains, and you're going to dump them out into a cookie sheet, and you're going to spread them out like so, and you're going to put these in either a dehydrator, or I like to do several batches of these. Like, you can get several jars of these going at the same time and do it all at once, maybe do 2 or 3 jars together. And once you've got all these wheat grains sprouted, you can load up your oven as full as it'll go with these sprouted grains, and then you can dry them out in a warm oven. Take it down to about 150 degrees Fahrenheit is what you want to do. You don't want to cook them, you just want to dry them out gently like what a dehydrator would do. And and it'll take about 24 hours, 12 to 24 hours to dry them out completely. Every few hours, take them out of the oven, turn them with your hand, so that the wet ones on the bottom come to the top, and you're drying them as evenly as you can. And once you notice that they're completely dry, then you can either store these sprouted and dried wheat grains in the refrigerator. But what I prefer to do is I like to grind them immediately. As soon as they're dry and they've cooled off completely, then I'll grind them up into some sprouted flour, and I'll freeze that sprouted flour immediately to lock in the nutrition. Because once you sprout these grains, they become quite fragile, even more fragile than they would be otherwise. So when you grind sprouted flour, the nutrition is going to disappear out of that sprouted flour even more quickly than if you ground flour from wheat that was not sprouted. So once you have your sprouted flour, let's talk just a bit about what sprouting actually does. Sprouting changes the chemistry of the wheat considerably. First of all, it creates vitamin C. There's no vitamin C in wheat normally, but when you sprout it, a considerable amount of vitamin C is created. It increases the vitamin B content of the grain considerably. It also breaks down the gluten, and it also breaks down some of the complex sugars that is in the starch part of the grain. The types of sugars that can cause intestinal gas for people that don't have, their digestive balance is not perhaps as good as it could be. And it also neutralizes phytic acid. You may have heard some positive things about phytic acid. Actually, phytic acid is not that great of a substance to consume with regularity, because phytic acid actually inhibits absorption of calcium, magnesium, iron, copper, and zinc. So all these wonderful minerals that are in your grain are being inhibited from being absorbed if you don't traditionally prepare the grain to break down the phytic acid. And of course, sprouting is one of the ways that phytic acid is broken down. And finally, you may have seen there's been a lot of buzz recently in the media in the last year or two about aflatoxins. Aflatoxins are a potent carcinogen that is in grains, and it's found in all the refined carbohydrates at the store, all the starchy chips, crackers, cookies, even the organic ones at the store are full of aflatoxins, which is a potent carcinogen. And people are being encouraged to really cut back on those kind of foods. Well, isn't it wonderful to know that sprouting completely inactivates aflatoxins? So if you take the time to sprout your grain at home and then grind it into flour and then make your own baked goods at home, you can be happy to know that they're aflatoxin free. And one final point I'd like to leave you with is that if you have trouble with grains and for any reason you've gone off grains for a period of time because you have trouble digesting them and you feel that your gut has healed and you want to go back onto grains and try them and see how you do, if you can digest them any better than you could before, sprouted grains would probably be, in my opinion, the best type of grain to try first. It is the easiest to digest because, again, when this little sprout actually forms, you're actually changing the grain considerably. The whole chemical structure of it in a lot of ways is changed and becomes so much more easily digestible. And I have found personally that sprouted grains are easier to digest than even soaking grains or sour leavening, fermenting grains, which are the other two ways of properly preparing grains. So I hope you have found this short video segment on sprouting grains to be helpful to you. If you have any questions on what you've seen in this video today, please comment on the blog and I'll be happy to answer all your questions.